Let's talk about why you might be waking up right around the 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the night. Now, in this video, what I wanted to do is instead of just listing a number of possibilities of what might be happening, we're actually going to look at a dynamic that I see in my sleep coaching practice quite regularly. So this is where somebody has actually struggled with long-term insomnia and sleep problems. So this 3 o'clock waking in the middle of the night is not a random one-off scenario. It actually happens very regularly, almost most of the night. So this is what we're really going to look at, because that situation is very different to someone who might randomly wakes up at 3 o'clock very, very rarely in their life. Now, as you can imagine, when it comes to this big picture of sleep problems and insomnia, we really got to look at personalizing some of these suggestions and advice that you can find online, because generic things often ends up meaning that it helps no one. So we're going to take a scenario that, like I said, it's a very common scenario in my sleep coaching practice, and we're going to work through what might be happening and how you can actually navigate these challenges that you have at around the 3 o'clock mark. So we're going to take someone that goes to bed around 10:30, 11 o'clock. It doesn't have to be exact, but right around that time, which therefore obviously gives us a 4-hour time frame. Now, what also is important to know in this situation is if you also struggle to fall asleep and maybe it takes you half an hour or 2 hours to fall asleep, then what we're looking at is a very different scenario, because it's not just only about the 3 o'clock waking, but it's also that you're struggling to fall asleep in an easy and effective way. So when we have a more complex situation like that, it's not just about the 3 o'clock, it's actually looking at other areas of sleep as well. So we're going to park that scenario, and obviously you're very welcome to ask any questions in the comments, and we can discuss that in a different way in the future videos. So when it comes to this more of a stable scenario, yes, I know it can still be frustrating and disappointing, but you don't seem to have any issues falling asleep in an effective way. You, let's say, fall asleep in 15, 20 minutes, no matter what happens, right around that 10:30, 11 o'clock mark. And your lifestyle is also stable, meaning that you don't have shift work and things like that going on. So when we look at this more of a stable beginning to the nighttime, but then you wake up at the 3 a.m. Time frame or around that time. So it can be 2 o'clock if maybe you fall asleep at 10:30, or it can be maybe more 3 o'clock when it's more like 11 o'clock. So again, depends on your situation. But one of the most important things to recognize first is how regular is this challenge or issue. So if you're waking up at 3 o'clock once every 14 days, then we're not seeing that as a regular dynamic. Maybe it's a one-off. So if it's a one-off, that's very different than if it's a regular occurrence every couple of nights, or at least 3 or 4 out of every 7 days, right? So again, this is where different situations will require different approaches. So if we take this scenario where it's regularly happening 3 or 4 out of 7 nights, then we know that it is a dynamic that keeps going every single night, and it shows up very regularly, regardless of some of those changes that might be happening in your life separately. So that's where we're going to begin, is you don't have an issue falling asleep, but you are waking up sort of the 3 or 4 hours of sleep, initial sleep, and you wake up afterwards. Now, one of the practical ways I describe this particular situation to my clients is that, remember, when you are falling asleep, you are coming off an entire day of functioning, work, anything that you have going on in your life, socializing, things like that. So when you're falling asleep, you will be most likely your highest point of tiredness, physically, emotionally, mentally, not just physically. So we got to look at the other components as well. So when you are transitioning into sleep, you are coming out of this lack of energy state. And so when you transition into sleep, your body will be more highly relaxed in every single way, physically, emotionally, mentally, which means that even as you go through sleep stages, and you do go through sleep stages, even if it feels like it's one chunk of your sleep for 3 or 4 hours, And I will link a video here so that you can look at sort of sleep stages and how they sort of evolve over your nighttime. What that means is because most likely you have gone into sleep with high relaxation through the tiredness, you're not actually disturbed as you transitioning between sleep stages. You're able to go deeper into this different sleep stages and most likely experiencing more what feels like a deeper version of sleep. Again, we're not going to sort of talk about it too scientifically, but that's what it feels like. So it's a solid 3 or 4 hour chunk of sleep. Now, when we look at a healthy adult or even someone who's struggling with insomnia and sleep problems, what we would aim for is something like between the 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Now, if you had a 4 hour chunk of sleep till 3 o'clock in the morning, that's already half of your, what we would say, desired outcome. So you had a really good solid chunk of sleep that was not disturbed. So naturally, as you're coming to sort of halfway through your night, your body has already become more recharged. Your mind has become more recharged. So when we look at physical, emotional, mental energy, you've already had a version of sleep so that it can actually provide you with that recovery, provide you with that sort of amounts of energy. And what I find in my client work is because you have actually had some version of that quality sleep to begin with, as you are now transitioning through the sleep stages, different components can actually come in and wake you up from this chunk of sleep that you're experiencing. And so this is where we're now coming to this point of 3 o'clock in the morning. But the reason I wanted to explain what happens before, because it is relevant. And so when you had a really good, what feels like a good quality chunk of sleep, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, that might be happening because your body has recharged enough to start becoming more active in some way. So let's look at the physical part. So one of the reasons you might be waking up is because you're used to being active. You used to move around, you used to maybe fidget even during the day, you used to sort of move between different spaces. So when you have recharged enough, your body could look for a similar behavior. Okay, so is it time to start moving around in a different way? Another thing that can happen physically is that because you have been sleeping for that amount of time, you might become more stiff, or you might become more sort of, even pain can show up. Now, again, it depends on the age group. It depends on any sort of other medical conditions that might be playing a role. So again, the physical component of why you might be waking up could be for physical or medical reasons. It doesn't have to mean that it's a major issue. Even when we're getting a cold, our body's fighting it before the symptoms show up. So this physical part can be simply because your body has recharged enough in a certain way and it's now ready to become active again. And if you're a highly active person, usually that means that you, what I would call, you get activated. And again, one of the things I said here that's very important to bear in mind is not to disregard anything that you've got going on physically. So if there is any medical diagnosis, if there is any signs that you need to seek that assessment, then that would be the best thing to start, physically speaking. Go have it checked out. Just check that there is nothing sort of medically going on. I have had clients over the years who have gone through infections, soreness of the body after heavy workouts. So lots of different things can happen when it comes to this physical part of why you might be waking up at the 3 o'clock mark after a solid chunk of sleep. Then we look at the second part, which is what I look at as the emotional parts. Now, if you don't particularly feel upset about anything, or there's nothing significant going on, so you don't know what the reasons are, naturally, if you do know the reasons, you know that they're showing up at that time as well. But if you don't really have any sort of ideas of why you are waking up at 3 o'clock, my invitation to you is look at this emotional part, but from the perspective of how upsetting it is, or frustrating, or disappointing, or annoying it is that you have woken up at 3 o'clock. Now, when it becomes regular, what that usually means is you had a couple of nights when you've already experienced this. So you would have checked the time and knew that you were awake at 3 o'clock. So this emotional part usually comes from either the disappointment of here we go again, I'm awake again, and probably also because you might not find it easy to fall asleep again. So if you have had more problems falling back to sleep at around 3 o'clock, that carries emotions already because the memory exists. So as you're waking up, even if there is no particular reason, the waking itself can generate that emotional reaction, the emotions, the frustrations, the disappointment. That is the reason why you're waking up and the reason why you're not able to fall back to sleep in an easier way. So this emotional component can also be a bit more complex depending on the situation. So if this 3 o'clock in the morning also means that you maybe have not been able to complete your nighttime and have a really good quality nighttime, that will bring in performance pressure. That will bring in, like I said, the frustration of here we go again. It's going to mean something for my daytime. Maybe it means that you're not able to do as many things as you want. It might be that you become upset that you're not able to figure out the situation and help yourself to get a better quality nighttime. So see, the waking itself, even as you're transitioning out of sleep stages, can trigger emotions within them. So this is how you would know. Either you know that the emotion that's showing up at 3 o'clock is in relation to something that happened in the past, or maybe something that is going to happen in the next day or the future, or it's actually relating to the waking itself as the problem has become more of an issue that you're struggling with. So this is where that emotional part comes in. Now, the way you would then move through this and help yourself to have bigger chunks of sleep is, first of all, not checking the time. And I see this very often in my client work. I know you want to know, but it often can actually be part of the reason why you are waking up and becoming alert, because your mind will then want to check what time it is to ensure that you can confirm either way. The other thing is, by not checking the time, you're also going to know whether there is any other emotion that is swirling around at that time. So if you've carried emotion into your sleep with you by maybe some of the things that happened during the day that you haven't really dealt with, they'll be likely to be showing up at that time as well. Then we would look at calming yourself down. So again, there's many different ways to do that. But if we take out clock checking as an example, a lot of the times what I see with clients is actually it creates a very different situation, because it's not a performance pressure piece anymore. It's okay, well, my nighttime is for me to just relax again and go back to sleep again, and we navigate whatever else is showing up. But that could be your first step, is not actually checking the time, because that will mean that you're not actually then triggered into some of these other emotions. Then the third part, which kind of goes along with the clock checking part, is this mental component. So when you have no real reason why you feel like you're waking up, one of the most common things I see in my practice now, especially if you're more of a thinker type person or more active in terms of your daytime, using your mind for your work, is that if you spend 16 hours of your day being highly active mentally, after 3 or 4 hours of sleep, your mind has recharged as well. It's freshened up and it's ready to go again. So if your daytime behavior is this what's next and continuing to use every single piece of that time that you have for something, that value mentally is there even in the nighttime. So when you're waking up at a certain time, one of the things that I see in my practice is that you might be checking whether or not you're already close enough to waking up to then start your day. So again, the checking the time can come in because the intention or the reason you're checking the time is because you're ready to go again. You're ready to start doing things. You're ready to start being active and so on. So if you're more of a thinker type and you're seeing this activation of I wonder what time it is so that I can decide whether or not I need to do something or not. What that means is that could be the reason why you're waking up. As you're transitioning out of sleep stages, your mind becomes more aware. That's a normal part of these transitions. And that actually brings back daytime behaviors that will actually help you to elevate that awakefulness to the full waking up. Obviously, that's not helpful at 3 o'clock, but that's what your normal setting is in a practical way. So when you've got this kind of scenario, that naturally brings some emotions with it as well. So then we might be looking at more of a complex situation. But if the mental part is what's activated more, then what we need to look at is how you're separating your daytime to your nighttime from the beginning of your night. And again, I talked about these different things across many different videos of the past. But waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, very specifically, are usually some of these components together depending on your situation. So if you don't really know any particular reasons, what I would invite you to do is start looking at how these things show up in your wakings when they happen regularly. What kind of things are happening when you're now awake and you're reacting to the waking? Because those things that show up as reactions will also help you figure out what you need to do in order for this not to become a regular problem. And maybe this 3 o'clock waking not to mean that you're now not able to fall back to sleep in an easier way. So I hope this video has helped you to look at what might actually be going on in your situation when we look at this sort of 10:30, 11 o'clock falling asleep without issues. Again, this is a specific way I talked about it today. If you also have problems falling asleep, then we're looking at a very different situation and what might be playing a role in that 3 o'clock waking later on. So if you've got any questions about this topic, any scenarios you want to share with me that you're experiencing, and maybe they're different to this scenario, I'm very happy to obviously record more videos about this in the future, really talking about those scenarios that I see in my practice and how you would want to navigate the reasons why you are waking up and get yourself to a better place. So thank you so much for watching this video. And if you want to check out my work, you're very welcome to come over to my website and look at some of those things that I do within my client work that can help you overcome your long-term insomnia and sleep problems.